what do you see? And without a moment's hesitation, it was like opportunity. Like he was the first executive at one of these companies that I'd spoken to who really said, like, why are we trying to fight all of this? Why can't we find a way to actually like harness this power and this innovation? And I'm like, okay, you had me at hello.
More, and faster, bigger, and smarter. But is this relentless drive actually sustainable? Because yes, technology is advancing faster than we can adapt, and it's not just a feeling. It is even captured in the so-called MarTech's law, which is an empirical observation that highlights the growing gap between technological progress and organizational change. So in this episode, I'm joined by Scott Brinker, the Vice President of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot. We'll explore MarTech's law, the democratization of technology and content, agentic AI, and what these trends mean for innovation. Let's go. So, Scott, you are the VP Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot. You're also the editor at chiefmartech.com, and we're going to talk about that as well. And you wrote the best-selling book called Hacking Marketing, published by Wiley in 2016. So it's great to have you on the show. Thanks very much for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
And there's one thing I really need to talk about, which is MarTech's law. Scott, as far as I know, you introduced or you coined the term MarTech's law, which is a very fascinating idea. It's the idea that technology changes exponentially, so change happens faster and faster and faster, but organizations change logarithmically, which means change happens slower and slower and slower. And that, is inducing some challenges for us. Can you explain this law and what led you to this thought?
Yeah, and I think law, we could put it in quotations. It's more of an empirical observation, but on the technology side, we more or less know that technology does have an exponential curve to it. The heart of that has been Moore's law, the doubling of computing power roughly every couple of years, which surprisingly, through a number of different mechanisms, has continued to hold long past the time when it should have been reasonably expected to. But we've seen some of these same dynamics over the past few years, for instance, with LLMs and AI. They seem to be starting to slow down a bit now, but had a big exponential, curve. And I think, again, more from a just sensation of what it feels like as the world continues to spin faster and faster, with technologies, is people definitely feel that the technology races ahead faster than most of us can keep up with it. I think we're also, anyone who's had a job in an organization of any size, also knows that change in organizations, it's hard. I mean, the whole disciplines, whole sciences around change management for a reason, and so this exponential curve of technology changing, juxtaposed against that much harder, slower pace of change for organizations, it creates this really challenging tension that I think actually so much of what we feel, particularly here in the 21st century, as managers, as leaders, is like, wait a second, it's like I've got one foot on the dock and one foot on the ferry. As the ferry is going away, this feels like it's getting harder. And so, we can talk a bit about it. I think this is a phenomenon that, again, empirically, most people recognize. And I don't think there's an easy solution to it. I think there are strategies one can take to help manage it. But at least I haven't been able to come across anything like, oh, yeah, and by the way, here's how you can either get technology to just slow down or get our organizations to like radically speed up.
I mean, obviously there is not a simple or a single answer to it. Probably both is true. I mean, that's why there are certain movements, right? So if you follow, Twitter and X for some time, there is different movements. For example, there is an acceleration movement, but there is also a movement that says, oh no, we need to freaking slow down. For example, AI development because it's advancing too fast. So I get the idea. I mean, the basic idea is quite simple. And just the baseline idea, technology advances faster over time. And I think, as technologies, once they are available, they serve as building blocks for new technologies. And then the rate of change soon reaches, exponential speed. And we don't have the bandwidth. So both organizations and also humans don't have the bandwidth to do it all. But I wonder, is there also a psychological barrier to adopting technology advances? Because it almost feels like, there is a human bottleneck to technology advancement.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, again, even just setting aside technology for a moment, um, most people resist change. And I am not a psychologist. I don't even play one on TV, so I wouldn't do a good job of being able to analyze that. But I'd say one of the things that I have read and heard multiple times that has actually really stuck with me is the degree to which that resistance to change is something that we tend to develop as we get older. For children, okay, well, again, it depends on the child, depends on the thing. Some definitely resist change too, but in childhood, often, we see a little bit more of that curiosity, like, oh, wait, what's this? This is something new. And so, one of the things when we talk about like, okay, how do you manage this environment of MarTech's law of just, this like incredible rate of change, how do you adapt better to that? One of the approaches that I think is, worth leaning into is something that's like, how do you help feed and develop curiosity? Um,
Probably, and I think the pressure is real, right? The pressure to innovate feels constant. But of course, as stated by MarTech's law, resources, which includes money, time, human bandwidth, they are finite. Do you think that there are any good approaches? And again, I don't think there is the one approach, but any good approaches to strike the balance between embracing new tech, but also not getting overwhelmed with too much change at the same time?
Yeah, so the two approaches that I've recommended is first being very thoughtful and strategic about which changes you embrace. That it's impossible to embrace all the changes, and one of the common failure scenarios we see is people trying to do too many things at once and doing none of them well. You just have to accept there's more change happening than you're going to be able to process and harness effectively. So take a little bit of time to just reflect like, okay, out of all these changes, which ones are most relevant to our business, to our customers? Pick one or two of them, focus on getting those right. I think that's a better strategy than trying to peanut butter too much change across too many different things at once. The second thing is, while I haven't seen any organization that's going to be able to change at an exponential rate, some organizations are better at change than others. This is very often done under the label of agility and agile management. And coming from a background in software development, where agile software development techniques, sort of partly got developed back at the turn of the century to help software developers deal with like this incredible rate of change that people always expected in software projects. I think it is possible to lean into like, how do we develop some of our technical architectures to be more evolutionary, more adaptable? How do we embrace things like agile management techniques into our process and into our workflow? How do we make sure we're investing enough in training and enablement so that people are on a path that allows them to continually evolve and develop? Again, none of these are panaceas, but if you can bring these things into how you're running your business, if you are able to be more agile through them, than your competition, that might be all is necessary to be successful in the market.
I think that is a great take. So what you're basically saying is you need to be very strategic, at choosing the right technology, but also the right change to make, because there is just too much you can do, and you're basically putting too much pressure on a team, on an organization, if you're just trying to do all at once. So you try to embrace LLMs, you try to embrace AI, you try to embrace no code, low code, you're trying to embrace maybe blockchain in the near future, what have you not. So rather be more strategic, and maybe even have a strategic prioritization process. And then, of course, be agile, sure. But I think that's one of the harder things to do, to be strategic and to choose the right investments to make at the right point in time. Whereas just trying everything. I mean, we've seen a lot of these innovation labs and trend labs and technology labs being created at large organizations, just to be closed down a couple of years later because they tried kind of everything, but maybe it didn't turn into the impact everybody wanted. So being strategic about it is important, but it's also hard at the same time.
Yeah. Probably one of my favorite authors, thinkers was Clay Christensen, who, sadly passed away a few years ago. But, all of his writing, around like the innovator's dilemma, boy, it was so influential for me in just understanding, these dynamics at a number of different levels. One of which is just like how incredibly hard it is for companies to deal with disruption, even when they see it, even when they see it coming and they're like, yep, all right, no, I see this disruption, but, either they, trying to do it within the main line and the system rejects it, or you're trying to, do it off on its own thing, but then trying to get it reintegrated. It's not an easy thing. But again, I feel like in so many things in today's world, it isn't about perfection. I mean, none of us are going to like nail any of this perfectly. It's simply about being better at it than perhaps we were in the past, or from a more market perspective, can we be better at it than our competitors? And so I don't know. I take a certain I don't know. Maybe this is like one of these sorts of, like exercise momentum things, like just a certain amount of appreciation that, like, hey, as long as we're focused on getting better one day at a time, again, it doesn't matter if we aren't reaching some ideal state.
And I mean, you must have. I assume you must have been also very strategic with those decisions at HubSpot, right? I mean, you being in a position as a platform ecosystem VP, is that maybe one of the reasons why you actually created a platform ecosystem? Because you decided, well, we can't do it all, but let's get partners built on top of HubSpot and the fantastic reach that HubSpot has. Was that maybe one of the reasons, or am I shooting in the wrong direction?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is, and again, this isn't unique to HubSpot. This is, certainly all of the folks who've been champions of, platform strategy in general, is this recognition that if you can actually get an ecosystem built up around your company, wow, it is, I mean, it creates a certain robustness, because in many ways it is, a little bit of that sort of evolutionary dynamic, where there's so many different things that are being tried in parallel. It's almost like that parallel change management that any one company would never be able to do. But you don't have one company doing it. You have hundreds, maybe thousands of companies, all doing it, but they're around that, common platform ecosystem that allows pretty much everyone in the ecosystem to benefit from whichever particular ones happen to like catch on and, really rise forward. So, um, part of what brought me to HubSpot was, before joining, I had been running my own ISV software company in the MarTech space. And so it was challenging to get things integrated in those days. So I had a personal feeling for that. But at the time, I was also with Chief MarTech, tracking a map of all the different marketing technologies out there. And what had started as an exercise with a couple hundred, which seemed like a lot, over a matter of a few years, mushroomed into thousands and thousands. Um, And when you saw that sort of exponential explosion in all these different new kinds of software products that were coming into marketing and sales, um, to me, it became clear like, okay, there's no way that any one company is going to be able to bottle all of that innovation. Just things are moving too quickly. There's too many emerging directions. Um, but I got really excited about like, okay, this feels like the perfect environment in which a platform ecosystem, could really bring the best of both worlds. It's a way of like harnessing all that independent innovation from all these different companies, but hopefully providing enough connective tissue that when customers decide like, okay, yeah, I want this platform, and then I want this product, and this other product, that we can actually get those things to work together without the customer having to like, bring out like duct tape and rubber bands to make it work.
And what's the starting story out of this? Did you just, I don't know, shoot a LinkedIn message to Dharmesh or Brian and said, "Hey, got an idea. Let's do a platform ecosystem for HubSpot," or probably not. So what's the story behind?
Well, I think Brian and Dharmesh, even when they had founded the company, had aspirations from the very beginning to become a platform. Dharmesh is very much a student of platform ecosystems, and I'd known them from the very beginning. We were both here in the Boston area, and so it was really great to like watch them grow. When they reached out to see if I would be interested in helping them, I will share one anecdote. So it was at that same time over those years that I, again, had this map of what had become thousands and thousands of different MarTech products. And one of the things I would often do when I was presenting at a conference, I had the chance to do, say, a fireside chat interview with one of the executives of a major MarTech company. Like I'd interviewed leaders from Adobe, I'd interviewed leaders from Oracle, is I'd be on stage with them and I would show them that map of all those different companies. And I'd say, okay, it's like a Rorschach test. What do you see here? And the answer was almost always some form of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like the FUD factor of like, oh, no, we love that graphic because we sell against that graphic. Like, you don't need to deal with all of that mess. You just buy everything from us. I'm like, all right, well, I mean, that's an answer, but, if we look at the scoreboard, you don't seem to be tamping this down, And so when, I sat down with Brian Halligan for the first time to talk about possibly joining them, he's interviewing me, but I'm coming around like, all right, I'm going to interview him. I show him the graph. I'm like, all right, Brian, what do you see? And without a moment's hesitation, he was like, opportunity. Like he was the first executive at one of these companies that I'd spoken to who really said, like, why are we trying to fight all of this? Why can't we find a way to actually like harness this power and this innovation? And I'm like, okay, you had me at hello. Yeah. And so it's been a real honor to be able to work with them to, yeah, at least for one MarTech product in the space, help feel like I had a bit of an influence on shaping an ecosystem strategy.
Yeah, that is a fantastic story. And it's interesting because while technology speeds ahead, there is also movement to make building new technology easier. So, tools to let anyone and not just engineers create stuff. So today, someone without coding experience, they can design apps, connect their apps, build entire website in minutes, write blog posts within minutes. Quality is open for debate, but still. Um, so are we actually creating more technology and content than we're actually capable of absorbing, using, and even remembering? And what does that do to innovation and productivity, or even the ability to focus? Because with all those partners and with this exponentially growing ecosystem, there is just, I've seen your maps. There is just so much you can analyze. There is just so much you can work with. So is it just too much?
I guess the question is too much compared to what alternative? It feels like there are some of these things that, okay, this has just become the nature of our environment. Um, I think there are a couple different things when we think about there being too much. One is that sort of selection criteria of like, okay, because no one needs all of this. In fact, anyone, probably needs at most the tiniest fraction of it. The fact that they have choice in which of that tiniest fraction they pick, um, yeah, having a lot of choice is hard. This is a known phenomenon, but there are also benefits. There are benefits. The competition in the market ultimately really more often than not serves the buyer. People talk about wanting a lot of consolidation. Historically, markets that consolidate very heavily end up favoring the sellers over the buyers. So, be careful what you wish for there. But the fact that there is also a lot of variance in what people want, that choice can be helpful. Now, of course, the challenge is you can't effectively evaluate everything that's out there. And so, that economic phenomenon of satisficing, I think is the only rational way to approach it. It's like, listen, I'm not looking for the perfect tech stack. And there might be some theoretically ideal combination out there that could, do even better for me. But that doesn't matter because really, again, the technology is just an enabler for, a strategy, a customer experience, a business I'm trying to create. If I get a set of tools that enable me to do that and they do it in a cost-effective way, yeah, I don't need to be worried about the fact that there were maybe other combinations out there, as long as the combination I have works. That said, I do think even within people's tech stacks, we have this challenge where there's now just so much technology in our digital operations that it has become increasingly difficult for us as humans to even harness the full value out of it. Gartner does this study. They've done it for the past few years where they talk about the utilization of MarTech. And like about 4 years ago, when they first ran the survey, respondents said they were probably utilizing about 60% of their marketing technology, which kind of a poor number when you're like, what? You're only barely using a little more than half. And then like the next year it dropped to 50%. And then the next year it dropped to 40%. And this past year it dropped down to 33%. So people are saying like 2/3 of their tech stack they aren't even using, and whether that's specific products or capabilities within products. I mean, again, the headline is, I'm only utilizing 1/3 of what's possible here. It may just be that, as humans, there's just only so much we can keep track of. And so I guess what excites me is at this exact moment is when we're starting to see this rise of AI interfaces where more and more of these AI technologies seem like they're going to have this sort of agentic capability that we can interact with them at a relatively high level of like, okay, these are in natural language, things that I'm looking to do. I'm looking for a report of X, Y, and Z. Okay, I don't need to now go in and like figure out which menu option and how do I select these different dials and which thing. I mean, because that was just too much to learn how to do it. It goes ahead, it translates that into that, creates the report for me. It doesn't have to do it as a black box. It can actually show me like, yep, here's the report. Here's the configurations I set for it. Is this what you wanted? I can adjust things. But I really do feel like these AI interfaces might be the key to breaking this barrier of saying, yeah, the technology is really, really complex. Just as humans alone, there's only so much we can do to manage that. But humans in combination with some of these AI capabilities, maybe actually we can get a lot more value out of that complexity, certainly than we've been able to get so far.
And I think the entire concept of agentic systems or agentic AI, well, it's not entirely new. I mean, we've seen, if you go back in the days, there has been a lot of discussion on, for example, multi-agent systems, even in the 80s or 90s, maybe, with or without modern AI. But there's been a lot of research already going into agentic systems or multi-purpose agentic systems. Now we have, or we continue to develop agentic AI. And it's like maybe the buzz of today. And let's see how well this ages. Yeah. But it's interesting because systems that do not just assist but act on their own is maybe the word of tomorrow. What do you think? Where's this going to? I mean, will it be the service as a software revolution where we actually have agents to turn former human labor tasks like analyzing stuff, presenting stuff, maybe even have the agency to reason and to create, for example, reports or analyze something? as a service. So instead of software as a service, have now service as a software that uses agentic AI?
I definitely think that's a model we're seeing emerge. Whether the old model is going to completely go away, I'm not so sure about that. I kind of have the sense that this is additive. In a recent report that we had put together here, we're looking at like, okay, there's a traditional SaaS seat-based pricing where again, you're mostly about getting a tool set to an individual user. Over the past few years, we've also seen, the rise of this sort of usage-based pricing, which particularly when you're actually building things, on top of hyperscalers like AWS, GCP, this is, you're generally paying for the compute and the storage you use, and now you've got this sort of service as a software outcome-based pricing, which is like, oh, if I'm going to have a customer service bot, try and automatically resolve incoming customer service queries, I'll pay whatever it is, $2, €2 for, every successful resolution. My sense is all of these models have a place in, a different set of capabilities of what's going to make sense. And so I think for a while, we'll probably see all three models coexist. Um, but I definitely see, the services of software. I think it's definitely going to be a significant component of how we buy stuff. It makes sense.
And it's probably going to be, low code or no code platforms that are empowering maybe the creation of agentic systems. Now, what does this mean for traditional software and software developers? Are they becoming architects, overseers, or obsolete?
I mean, this is one of the things about the environment in which we're in, where things are changing so rapidly, is I find it very humbling to even attempt to like predict, okay, well, what is this going to look like, say 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I don't know. I think in the more immediate future here, it's a combination. There's a set of software we have that is fairly large in scale and fairly sophisticated. Very often serves as the foundations, the frameworks in which we're operating our businesses. CRM, ERP, these customer automation platforms. It's not that it wouldn't technically be possible for somebody to like recreate all these things from scratch for themselves, but why? It would not seem for most companies to be a comparative advantage to invest resources in that. Rather, I think a lot of them benefit from like looking at these things through a platform lens to say like, okay, I want a platform that's going to provide a set of these core capabilities. It's going to provide a governance framework, some guardrails. It'll be my systems of record. But then on top of that platform, I want the ability to very fluidly be able to create workflows or customer experiences that are highly tailored to my particular business. And I think that's the place where this sort of, no code or, AI agents or things that get highly tailored to individual businesses can add so much value. And to me, they're complementary to a lot of those commercial systems, more so than being like replacements to them wholesale.
Mm. And I always wonder, does agentic AI then actually democratize opportunity even across industries, or rather does it risk concentrating power further into the hands of big tech?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it also depends on what you mean by big tech. I think one of the phenomenon that is true is all these things with like SaaS, with AI agents. I mean, pretty much any piece of software at this point in time in the business world, you can trace it back. It is probably somewhere running on either Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, or Google Cloud. Um, Now that's both really exciting, or perhaps scary, depending on how you look at it. Certainly, a lot of these things, like the marketplaces around things like GCP and AWS, part of like why they've thrived so much is because they've actually turned that underlying infrastructure consolidation as an opportunity, for procurement scale and economies of scale for buyers. It'll be interesting to see how people start to perhaps leverage that in a more operational way. So I do think, yeah, I mean, there is a consolidation at the scalar level. It's at the level above that where all of a sudden then like it feels like you just break out into this incredible Cambrian explosion of all these different variances of, oh, for this particular business, this particular department, this particular team, this is a particular software they want to use for this particular thing. So I don't know that I see that. And I mean, in some ways, that's like always feels like it's going to be the counter to too much consolidation. But then when a lot of people talk about big tech, they're talking about, other things like, as Apple, like how much, dominance do they have over a set of devices, companies like Meta, how much do they have over, like social media. Yeah, that starts to fall outside of my domain of expertise of like, yeah, I haven't really analyzed that. Don't have an answer.
No, but it's interesting. And similar to the discussion around AI. A couple of weeks ago, I was with a friend, and we, was kind of late night, and then we got into a cab, and we're just driving home from a dinner, from a business dinner, actually. And we noticed that the cab driver, he did not use GPS based navigation system. He just, when we asked him, why are you just not using your navigation system like Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever? His response were interesting. He said, like, well, he seemed frustrated about all this technology uh, advances developing so fast. So he said, well, I think AI is going to make us more dumb.
Hmm.
And I said, well, what's going to, and so he compared this to GPS based navigation systems, where he said, well, 10 years, well, I don't know, 15 or maybe even 20 years ago, we all were still using paper based maps to navigate. And so I knew exactly the streets and where I should navigate. And I can, get my clients in my cab from A to B just by, using my brain. And now he outsourced that brain capacity to a GPS based navigation system, and he's basically just the operator of the cab anymore. And maybe in a couple of years from now, it's even not him going to be operating the car, but maybe an autonomous car. So, well, job gone. And we discussed this a little bit, because we rely on AI to solve problems and make decisions and automate tasks and all this stuff. So what do you think? Is this actually making us smarter by freeing us to think bigger and interact more with people again? Or is it actually making us more dumb by eroding critical skills and judgment?
Yeah, wow. All right, just hit me with the big societal, question there. I think a lot of it comes down to the question of what do we replace that time and that brain power, like where are we like reallocating it? I mean, again, to use the sort of outsourcing metaphor, for companies, they have typically outsourced things that they did not feel were core to what their business is, where their differentiation is, where their comparative advantage is, and that was a strategy to actually allow them to double down on the things that they can do that they can't outsource. And so I think there's a bit of a metaphor for that of, yeah, I mean, if I'm turning over certain, labor tasks that took a lot of my time, but maybe actually weren't adding a lot of value to my net life or my net outcome, the ability to outsource some of that to AI, can be incredibly valuable if I recover that time and able to put it towards more productive uses. Now, again, this is really nice in theory. I think the big questions everyone is wrestling with is like, okay, how malleable and fluid is that reallocation? Okay, if I'm still here in the car, I didn't have to learn the maps, I've recovered that time, but I'm still stuck here behind this wheel, am I actually now productively like harnessing that time, in some other way? I mean, I don't think there's going to be one universal answer to this. I think it's going to be highly varied on, different jobs, different people. And yeah, I'm not so naive as to think that it's going to be an easy transition for everyone. I think it's going to be I frame this as like, yeah, you're asking me this massive societal question. I think is going to be probably the quintessential question for society for this next 10, 20 years is how do we adapt collectively given this shift that's going to happen?
I think that's a very balanced way of looking at it. And Scott, before this conversation ends, we have a new tradition on this podcast where the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who my next guest is. So that's a question that has been left for you. And the question is, what do you tell yourself you should be doing that you are not doing?
Mm. I should be unplugging more. This is something I believe in. Of like, I do think taking time away from the screens and the devices is a very healthy way, to recharge and reset and reflect. And while I believe that, I do not practice it very well. And so, yeah, that's something I should be doing. I think we're coming up here for the new year, so maybe a New Year's resolution. We'll see if I can do better this next year.
We are, and Scott, I really have to say thank you because I don't know if you know, but the idea of MarTech's law really has been influential in the corporate innovation community because it captures the feeling that people have. Things go faster, and why do we as an organization or as leaders or as a team, why can't we just keep up with it and have the bandwidth to follow that rate of change? It's bringing it down so simply in a chart, basically. And if you play around with that chart, you're going to find at least some ideas on, okay, what do we have to do? Create an inflection point and do other things to really try to get ahead of the curve and prioritize. And sometimes it feels that if you think about MarTech's law, it's actually making innovation sometimes a prioritization problem. So what do we prioritize instead of what do we deprioritize? What do we don't do? And I think this idea, even though it's emerging and coming from MarTech initially, and now stated MarTech's, as you say, quote unquote law, has actually been very influential in this community. So thank you for the contribution. It's really great. And if anybody who listens to this wants to learn more, I think you have written quite a few articles on at chiefmartech.com.
Yeah.
So we're going to link the blog in the show notes, and whoever's interested, of course, can have a look at that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me as your guest. And yeah, I'm really happy and honored to hear that MarTech's law has resonated with folks and is finding some utility out there.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, if you have not subscribed yet to this podcast, please go ahead and do so. It is a small thing, and it will help us continue to make the show better and better. So our promise to you is that we will continue to do our best to deliver exceptional value at no cost to you. So if you're not already a subscriber, then please go ahead and subscribe now. Thanks for listening. Take care, and bye-bye.